Welcome back, everyone. This is the Check for Understanding questions for the Intro to Loops section of Module 0 Building Blocks Intro. So just to be sure, at the end of these lessons, which link out to Udacity, we're going to have these Check for Understanding questions, and so that's what we're going to do. Fill out the rest of the while loop so that the following sequence is logged to the console. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So replace each comment to below. Okay, so we're going to do something real quick because I've seen a lot of people ask questions about this, and what you really need to do to get a good sense of what's going on, just real quick, I'm going to Replit, I'm going to click on JavaScript, that's going to give me a JavaScript kind of environment. I'm going to come over here to settings, change it to the dark side, which is actually not completely arbitrary. It actually has something to do with the focus and aperture of dark backgrounds versus light backgrounds, but also I think it looks cool. So anyway, we're going to come over here, we're going to grab this entire function, my function, and bring it on over to here. Now, if I run this, you're going to see that nothing happens. And the reason nothing happens, well actually we get a bunch of errors, is because this isn't valid syntax, but let us go ahead and assume that we had gotten rid of all of the errors by commenting them out, and we ran this function anyway. You want to understand that what's happening is we're not actually running the function. The only thing that's happening is my function, and the definition of it is going to get loaded into memory. And then it's going to say undefined because that's kind of what these replets do, is if you don't explicitly say something, or if you run a function, it's basically going to give you back the last value that was returned or registered by the REPL. And so since it says undefined, that's basically meaning like, hey, you didn't really define anything or do anything, so here's undefined. So what we're going to do is two things. First, we are going to uncomment this and we're going to solve this function. Then we're actually going to call it. So let's think about this in two very distinct sections. This is the definition of the function, and down here is going to be calling the function. And this is usually to prove that it works. And to prove that it works is to prove that it works as expected, because it's probably always going to do something, unless you have a syntax error. But what we want to make sure is not that it just works, but that it actually does something. So we're going to call this function, and inside of here, because we're console.logging, what we should see on the console output, which is over here, is the 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, what do they want? All the way to 1. So we need 10, we need a variable to go from 10 to 1. So if that's the case, we want to say while number is greater than 0. And we say that with the caveat in mind that we're going to change the value of the number to be whatever the number was minus 1. So this is what that looks like. Number is equal to number minus 1. Or we can say this, which is the exact same thing, number minus equals 1. Or we can use the abbreviated operator minus minus. That's essentially going to decrement the value of number. Number is going to be assigned to whatever it was minus 1, which is what we've been doing the whole time. Now, the last thing that we need to do here is console.log the number. So number is equal to 10, while the number is greater than 0, console.log the number, and then reset the number to be 1 minus what it was. Eventually, because number is going down and we need it to be greater than 0, it's going to be equal to 0, and this while loop is going to break. So let's go ahead and run this. We know now that we're calling the function, we will see a console output, and this can help us prove that the function is working correctly. Console output looks perfect. Let's go ahead and highlight all of the code from the function, bring it back over here, and paste it in. And see it lines up. We replaced the number is greater than 0, but that's essentially the conditional we wanted to put there. Logging the number of the console, and then subtracting 1 from the number. So let's run the tests, and we're in good shape. The code below counts multiples of 3 between 1 and 100. Rewrite the code to use a for loop instead of a while loop. Oh, that's fun. So we're going to go ahead and copy all of this. I'm going to come on over here, paste it in. So we have a my function. We're going to jump down here, and this one's a little different. As opposed to, actually, okay, so there's two things going on here. One, on line 16 is it's going to log to the console this message. And so let's run this and just see what happens. Right? Nothing happens because we haven't actually called the function. So what we'll need to do is call the function. Now, this is particularly poorly written because it says that it needs an input, but if you'll notice, the input isn't used anywhere inside of the function. So it doesn't really matter, so we'll say doesn't really matter because nothing inside of the function is actually relying on the input, which is why that this function's not really that well written. But that's okay. what they're having us do here is a decent idea, because describing how you can go from a while loop to a for loop and understanding that they can both kind of accomplish rather similar things, and there are some times when one would be better than the other. Eventually that's what we're going to be moving towards, and the first step in that is understanding that the syntax is relatively similar and understanding that you can go back and forth between the syntaxes. So let's run, and what we should see is console.log something like 33 multiples between 1 and 100, and there are. You'll notice this has no longer been no longer undefined, it's 33, and that's because on line 21 we're returning the multiples of 3 count. Again, this function is kind of oddly written because we don't do anything with that, and it's probably written that way because of the way the tests are written, and as you might have imagined, I don't really like this section of the course, so that's why I'm complaining about it so much. But to be sure, at the beginning, almost anything that you do that has you looking at code and going over code output and trying to figure out what's wrong with things, even if those things are poorly set up, and sometimes especially if those things are poorly set up, you're just going to be increasing the amount of prowess you have around code. So I can complain about it because I know why it's wrong. For you guys, you might want to avoid that for right now. Okay, so they want us to rewrite the while loop into a for loop. So essentially, everything that we're going to do is going to take place right around here. We don't want to affect the console.log because that's going to prove that our function works. We don't want to affect multiples of 3 count because we need a variable to count up the multiples of 3. So starting that at 0 makes perfect sense. What we're going to do is we're going to just start writing another for loop right here. We're going to say for, and then let's think about what a for loop has. There are 3 sections typically to a for loop. The first one is where we instantiate any variables that we're going to need. So it looks like the variable that we're going to need for incrementing or for indexing or for basically what we're instantiating for the purposes of the for loop is going to be this variable number. So I'm going to grab this by copying it and put that in here as the first section of the for loop. And I'm going to get rid of that. And the next thing that I'm going to do is the for loop's middle section, essentially right here where we are with the cursor, is where we check to see if the for loop should continue to run. So in a while loop, that goes right here, and it's basically all by itself. In a for loop, we're going to take that exact same statement, and we're going to put that inside of our for loop right here. So for a variable number is equal to 1, keep looping as long as number is less than or equal to 100. And then line 13 tells us that each time the block, essentially what we're doing inside of the for loop inside of the while loop has completed, we want to increment number so that eventually number will break this condition, which is to say number will eventually be greater than 100. So we grab this, copy it, and with the for loop, we don't actually put that inside of the for loop, we put that up here to say, okay, after you're done iterating each time, perform this action in the third section of the for loop. And then the middle of the for loop, which is to say, no, not the middle, the block of the for loop, which is to say what happens on line 16, is essentially what just happens on line 10 through 12. So we'll copy that, paste it on in there. For the while loop, we created a variable number. In the for loop, we're doing that inside of the for loop. For the while loop, we're checking the condition by itself. In the for loop, that's just the middle section. In the while loop, after we complete the code that it runs, which is inside of the for loop, we're going to increment the number by 1, which is the third section of the for loop. And of course, we just went over how the middle, or the inside of the for loop, we should say the block, we just copy that directly over. So now that we have what we think is a for loop that does what the while loop does, we're going to comment out all of the parts of the while loop. So everything else shouldn't really change. If we hit run again, we should see the exact same thing, and we do. So let's go ahead and copy all of the code, bring it on back, rewrite the code. Does this say anything about how the tests are really kind of... Okay, no worries. For this challenge to pass all tests, you will have to replace the entire while loop. Commenting out the while loop will not work. Ah, yes. That's because, well, it's probably just going to look for an instance of while. So let's actually just see what happens. We'll go ahead and delete this as opposed to commenting it out. And we'll run the test and see what happens. Excellent. So we're in good shape on that one. And that's pretty much it for this section. So thanks for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one.